Welcome back to Lunchtime BABLing. My name is Shea Brown. I'm the CEO of BABL AI, a company that audits algorithms for bias, ethical risk, and effective governance. I'm joined once again by our Chief Operating Officer, Jeffery Recker, and we've got our Chief Sales Officer, Bryan Ilg. Thanks, guys, for showing up. So we're going to have a fun conversation today. Well, fun might not be the word, but we're going to have a conversation today about the future of AI regulation globally and in particular in the US, given the recent election. But first, we're going to talk, we're going to have a few updates. So I'm going to kick it to Jeffery here.
Thank you for having me on again. Good to be on with Bryan for the first time. It's the first time we've done 3 people on one recording, so this will be an interesting experiment. Yeah, a lot going on. So we're going to talk about the election results and what the implications are in general for AI regulations. But first, just a handful of updates. So as usual, I'm in a new setting. I don't think I've been in this setting before, but this is my actual home. But next time you see me, I will probably not be in my home again because I'm going to be traveling again and probably be on the road for a while again, going to a bunch of places. I'll be in London this week at another conference, and Bryan will be in one in early December. I might be at that one as well. So yeah, just keep stay in touch with
in New York.
Yes. So
Yep.
stay in tune with the BABL newsletter and all of that to stay up to date if you want to come see us. And then we also launched a new little mini series called BABL Bites, where I'm just kind of giving high level information, little sound bites on things happening in the AI governance space. It's on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, LinkedIn, so pretty much everywhere where we're at. So if you want to follow along and watch me on my daily walks, kind of give you guys some thoughts, feel free to do that as well. But
so this was so let me just say, this is probably a much better use of that name. So I had originally thought of BABL Bites, but my version of it was going to be me doing a bunch of machine learning and bias testing math. And so I'm guessing that that's going to be more fun, people having a nice walk with you than watching me do math. So I think it was a good decision.
Yeah, I definitely stole it from you. It was too good of a name. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see if people like it, and probably I think it's doing pretty all right so far. So yeah, but today we're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, politics. I kid. We're going to talk about the election and its impact on AI regulation. And to start this off, we're going to be very explicit about this. This is not a political podcast. We don't plan on talking about politics in any way. Regardless where you're at on the political spectrum, we want to kind of avoid that and talk more about AI regulation, AI governance, and just the implications of a new administration coming in. Because I think there's some pretty very different strategies are about to come out based on what's happened in recent years. So I guess we're just going to go ahead and start. Let's maybe start with people's high level, what you kind of think of the next few years is going to look like in the U.S. in terms of regulation. Maybe Bryan, you want to kind of start us off?
Yeah, I definitely can toss my opinions in. So based on what I've read and hear, we have some new thought leaders in the space. Obviously, Elon Musk is going to have a significant impact in things, very AI forward, very business forward. And there's a lot of talk of deregulation at the federal level and pushing that responsibility down into the states. So I think that's going to create some interesting dynamics. But we're already seeing, so we can talk about how that's going to help innovation, businesses, thrive and, create new product. I think for the majority of businesses, though, they are, and our customers, they are very confused what to think about, from AI regulation in the United States. What does the deregulation federally mean for them? which states are going to be, the authorities that they need to be paying attention to if they want to sell within the United States. And we've already had multiple customers calling us saying, what was going on? Nothing's very clear. So I think that's, from my point of view, our customers who we want to speak to and help shed a little light on. There's going to be lots of changes, and we'll just have to deal with those as they come. But yeah, I'm excited to kind of dive into that a little bit more. But that's my high level.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll react a little bit to that, and then maybe Shea, you can jump in as well. So one of the things that's definitely, I think, going to happen, Trump has been pretty vocal about day one, repealing the executive order Biden proposed. And so it'll be interesting what that means. So currently the executive order kind of puts it on a lot of governmental agencies to implement NIST and put in some best practices. So repealing that executive order, what that means. On the other side of that, NIST itself, the AI Institute, has got pretty good bipartisan support. So I don't think much will likely happen to NIST, but we never know, especially with a lot of the deregulation talk. But that's something that first immediately comes to mind is something that's going to change. And then I'm curious, like the impacts, because I agree with you. I think deregulation, there's definitely going to be no large regulation that comes up in the United States. There's not going to be some U.S. version of the AI Act at the federal level. So, and for me, what that means is it's going to be on the states. The states are all going to start passing their own laws. And when the states start passing their own laws, it's going to be a complex compliance nightmare because the nuance is each of these laws are going to have their own nuances. Different states are going to have their, and cities and county level. It's going to be interesting to say the least. And it's not a red or blue. It's not, liberal, conservative, or anything like that. Like everyone kind of understands that there's different risk associated with AI. And from the federal level, I think there's going to be a lot of, take away regulation from the federal level to kind of give, not prevent companies from being able to innovate, but there's also still awareness that there's risk to these tools. So yeah, I'll leave it there, and then Shea, kind of let you give your thoughts. But that was something I just had thinking in reaction to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with all of that. I think for sure there's going to be deregulation or less enforcement on the federal level. So, I mean, it already started with the Chevron deference being gotten rid of at the Supreme Court level. Essentially, that defanged the regulators a little bit.
Do you want to explain what that is? Because that has massive implications for all companies and all U.S. citizens.
Yeah, I mean, I think it boils down to, and I'm not a legal scholar by any means, but it essentially boils down to the fact that there was some deference given to regulators when there's some ambiguity in laws. Regulators got some deference in terms of essentially guidance that regulators give out. So you've seen things like EEOC or FTC or the SEC. Those kind of regulators will issue guidance, and that guidance will get deferred to when there's some gaps. So it gave regulators a lot of latitude to actually, I wouldn't say make new law, but basically fill in places where there wasn't a lot of precedent and things like that. That's now not the case, and so that just means that judges are going to have a lot more leeway in terms of ruling on things. The bigger problem here, maybe not problem, but the bigger issue in terms of enforcement is that there's likely to be massive cuts in all of these because we now know Elon and what's his name, Ramaswamy, Vivek, yeah, are now going to be in charge of efficiency in the U.S. government. We saw what happened with Twitter. That means lots of cuts, and so a lot of regulators are probably going to get staff and budgets slashed. And so there's not going to be, so for companies that were worried about the FTC or the EEOC or other regulators coming after them for some AI issues, I think those regulators are going to have bigger fish to fry in terms of other really fundamental rights that might be, that the other duties that they have. AI is now a sort of a nice to have type issue on the regulation front. It's not something that they have enough resources to go for. And I think the states, like you say, are going to pick up the slack. They already did. I mean, a lot of our clients have come to us already because of state regulations or city regulations, not because of federal. The only other thing I want to bring up is the EU. And unless there's some significant international push where the US or the new administration really pushes on the European Union to do something drastic, like try to exempt US companies from these things, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think the European Commission or the European Parliament is going to allow that. But unless something like that happens, US companies who want to do business in Europe are still going to have to adhere to the EU AI Act. So long story short, I think in summary, it's not going to change that much for people in the sense that they still are going to have to do something to mitigate risks of AI. It just may shift the focus a little bit where they're maybe not necessarily worried about federal regulators, but they do have to navigate the minefield of 50 states and what they have to say about AI.
Yeah, I'll react to that a bit too and say, not just the EU, but most countries are implementing something. Australia has stuff in the books. Canada's got an AI Act in the books. England is got a ton of initiatives that they're working on. Japan, Singapore, the list just keeps going. So, and I think that even at the U.S. level, even with like deregulation and, say there's no large federal law, there's still stuff coming. Like people are aware of the risks. Kentucky just released some report about the use of AI within the government, and how it's being used and implementing AI governance best practices. So it's very much going to be everywhere. You also brought up a point too about like the EEOC. So one of the questions that I have about this is what's actually going to happen to organizations like that. So there's a lot of talk about deregulation. There's a lot of talk about centralization of power of these particular departments within the government. And a lot of the action related to AI comes down to like the FTC, the FCC, the EEOC, et cetera, et cetera. I think probably the best forefront example is going to be the Department of Education. My assumption would be the Department of Education would have, if not some type of guidelines for AI in education, but also how to teach AI or with AI. But there's a lot of talk of potentially getting rid of the Department of Education or deregulating it. So I'm curious, like your thoughts on that, like what type of implications that might have. Do you think any of this might actually come to be? Will anything change? Just kind of leave it there for you guys.
One thing, no matter what you think about, no matter how you voted or what you think, there's no denying that the administration that is coming in increases the uncertainty in what's going to happen. We saw that in the first term. Their policies can change really quickly. But that we also know that they're not afraid to make big changes, and especially now, given the cabinet that he's going to be putting together and the administration that he's bringing in this time. And I think I would not rule out the possibility of entire agencies getting just totally defunded or bare bones minimum, like go down to minimum. So FTC, that's consumer protection. They're going to have very little time, given the other concerns that they have to cover. They're going to have probably very little time to worry about specifics of AI, right? Because what we were seeing is that they're getting into the nuances of like, are you lying about the way you're using AI? These are These are things that are big concerns for us. We think about it all the time, but on the level of in the case of the EEOC, on the level of child labor, AI transparency is not at the level of I have a factory full of children or something. And that's the kind of thing they got to deal with. So I think that there's going to be a very big scaling back. Now, in the education space, given that we have people like Elon Musk, who is very much an innovator or trying to innovate, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a big push to use more AI to streamline things, including education, including all of these agencies. And so the part of the executive order, which is going to get repealed, that was pushing for more AI in the government, I don't think that's going to go away. I think that we're still going to see a big push. It's just on the regulation side of that, on the guardrails around that, might be dropped back a little bit. One thing I'll mention, and I'll stop talking, is while I think that some of the regulations around things like bias and discrimination, which can sometimes be viewed as a more of a left-leaning type concern, I think that will probably be diminished. But some of the other issues around AI safety and privacy, let's say, those kind of things may not go away. And I think that we will see a shift towards a language that's much more AI safety and testing and robustness kind of language. And a lot of the activities that were kind of much more in the bias discrimination side are going to get rolled up in, and in some sense protected and remain in a more AI safety kind of context. And I think those efforts are still going to go on. It's just a different language is going to get used.
Yeah. So I have two thoughts there. So a thing that's really important to understand is I do think Trump is very pro AI, and I think part of it is because of the people that he puts around him, like the Elon Musk, the Peter Thiels, et cetera, et cetera. And don't forget too that Trump passed an AI executive order himself near the end of his presidency, and it was around the idea of promoting trustworthy AI, but also promoting AI. And he's been pretty vocal about doing a lot of investment in AI. What that means, if it's gonna, no idea what it'll actually mean. Another thing he's mentioned is creating Manhattan Project style projects for AI in the military. So the investment is likely going to be big. So yeah, the shift in regulation is just, or executive orders or whatever that is kind of up for question. The other thing you hit on is this shift in I guess how we view these regulations, right? So it's the bias, for instance, the risk associated with it is just likely going to be viewed a little differently. That doesn't mean that the risk of these tools is going away. Bias exists in all algorithms. It's just in the nature of the math. It's just how big is it, right? What is it statistically significant enough to have an impact on someone's life? And where I think a gap is going to get filled, and I think you brought this up earlier, is in the judges. It's in lawsuits. If you have an algorithm or you're using an algorithm and it's producing a biased results towards some type of group of individuals, that's still there. It's just, is there some regulation that's going to put in some guardrails that's going to preemptively make companies do this in advance? Or is it going to be as a reaction to some type of lawsuit that came up because of, an unforeseen risk?
Yeah, I think that point right there, Jeffrey, is really important to maybe explore a little deeper in that. Again, just if litigation is going to be how we protect bias and all these kind of adverse outcomes of AI, and I do see that being the case. You've heard some things out of California; they're getting their war chests ready for all sorts of lawsuits. Who knows exactly what they're thinking? But I think that's going to put a lot of hesitancy within regulatory teams, legal teams, risk teams within organizations, and really trying to, again, it comes back to customers are going to be, and people investing into the space are going to be very uncertain what it is they need to be focused on. And I do think with the changing potentially like large, like rip and replace of, kind of institutional, federal agencies. Those things going away. It's going to just create a lot of clouds on what exactly people should be doing, and I think it's an unfortunate byproduct of how this will play out. Even though we're trying to streamline and be efficient and all these things, uh, you know, I think it'll create a lot more quagmire than anything else for organizations. Now, if I'm an executive, and I hear this all the time from like risk people, because we're at a lot of those client conferences and things like that, talking to those professionals, executives are out there saying we need AI, we need it now, and I think it's going to be aligned. A lot of the lack of regulation and a lack of certainty allows for executives to push harder for innovation. So I just think you're going to see a lot more advancement of the technology with less control in place because it's just so uncertain what is or isn't important. And this kind of goes back to why is compliance and all those things like really adopted by organizations? It's because of lawsuits and potential lawsuits, and they don't want to have that negative brand exposure or that class action lawsuit put against them. So it really is going to create a lot of uncertainty for AI developing organizations. And I think the winners, if you want to call them that, are the ones who are less risk averse or more, less risk averse to, potential flaws or biases or risks within the algorithm. They're going to target kind of the 80-20 rule and shoot and hope for the best. So it's interesting for sure, but that's kind of how I took that comment.
Yeah, you made me think of something as well. You're right. I think any company out there is trying to figure out how do I implement AI right now. It's all a part of their 5-year strategy. It's how do we make things, more efficient? How do we give more time back to our employees? How do we need fewer employees? How do we have better processes? How do we compete with our competitors that are doing these things? Whatever it is, everyone's trying to figure out how to implement AI. But at the same time, we see it. People are hesitating to implement AI because of all of the uncertainty. Some of that is compliance, but also some of that is just the uncertainty of the tool. Like, is it bias? Am I going to get sued for this? What type of risks are here? How can you prove that you're not using my data to train your tool, which is going to train my competitors? Whatever the fear is, there's definitely some fear out there. And that's one of the nice things about large regulations. I know we like to glamorize deregulation quite often, but a lot of times it's a guiding light. You have a chaos in the market, and this puts structure there, and that puts some ease and some guidance towards what to actually do. Now, if there is going to be a bunch of, say deregulation and uncertainty, I think that fear goes up.
Yeah.
Yep.
So not to switch topics, but maybe this plays in. What states are going to be really the ones driving regulation? Like, where should people be paying attention? What are the frameworks that will kind of hold? And I think about it this way. I think if you're trying to sell within the United States, you're by and large going to have to adopt somebody's principles. Someone will fill that gap, that regulatory gap. So is that Microsoft? Is that, Colorado? Is it New York? Like, I think business could be a big part of it. But I'm curious, Shea and Jeffrey, kind of where do you see that void of a framework being filled by? And like, what should people be paying attention to?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll give my 2 cents. I think that New York and California, and add Colorado to the mix, because it's a big economy, but also they've been very proactive. There's significant overlap between those three. So, but there's differences between the three as well. But I think that they are going to drive the need for having some kind of, let's say, quality management or risk management as it pertains to AI. And those regulations, unlike the sort of federal stuff, which may deprioritize things like discrimination, all three of those, discrimination and impact of fundamental rights is very high on the priority. And so in all three cases, discrimination and other rights impacting AI are very high on the list. So I think that's an important place to watch. The other thing I'll say is, in terms of corporations, they are like Microsoft. You mentioned Microsoft. Microsoft
Yep.
is going to start requiring, or has started requiring, for their vendors to get certifications around their practices around risk management. In particular, ISO 42001, which we've talked about on this podcast, has emerged as a pretty big requirement. And so just now, people are starting, like our friends at A-Line, for instance, are now certified to be doing these sorts of things. There's going to be a big push to get, just like SOC 2 and ISO 27001, there's going to be a big push to get some certifications around AI management systems. The place where I see, I mean, speaking from the BABL perspective, that there's going to be some gaps that we will need to fill, is that 42001 as a management system, and the same thing goes for NIST, the risk management system. They are fairly high level, and they recommend a bunch of different things, but a lot of those things are things like testing, technical testing, particular kinds of transparency, particular kinds of risk assessments and risk management activities are going to be very niche and very critical, and you could do a pretty poor job and still get an ISO 42001 certification. And so I think in industry specific areas where things like biased system is going to be a big deal, places like large language models that need to have guardrails and evaluations, that's a pretty big deal. 42001 is not going to cover that. And any place where or safety AI that's used in safety, like on oil rigs or things like this, right? This is where really bespoke, highly technical, highly targeted kind of evaluations and assurance is going to be needed. And so that is true of all of these state regulations as well, because you can get 42001. It doesn't mean you're compliant with Colorado's AI Act or California's regulations. And so we're going to see a very interesting movement of the chess pieces for people to try to figure out how are they going to be able to sell in a market that's so risky and dynamic.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that too. Shea, I think you're nailing it. The initial driver is going to be procurement, and that's actually going to make things even more complicated because every company is going to have a different procurement process. And a lot of times they might ask for a bias audit, but every company might have a different definition of what a bias audit is, right? So that's where I think the initial driver is going to be. And it's regardless of regulations that are coming. And it's for two reasons. The first one is they're global. Enterprise is usually very large global companies. So if they're selling into EU, they're going to want to be compliant across the board, and they're going to need to be compliant. So they're going to require that the tools that they're bringing on are compliant, right? And then the other piece of this is they're the first ones to get sued, right? So every time you see a new lawsuit because of a biased tool or tool that went rogue, they go after the largest players, right? I'm thinking like a $1 billion lawsuit for United Health a year ago, right? So they want to minimize that risk, and they're going to put it on the vendors that they're bringing these tools from. The next thing I think is the states will react, but I think the states, legislation is just slow by design. But also I think they're going to wait and they're going to react and see what happens, both not just in the market, but also within regulations, right? So like Trump is committed and said a lot of things about deregulation and all of this, but that doesn't necessarily mean he won't have regulations. And maybe, he does something and states react in a different way, or there is nothing and states feel that they need to put this on. I don't know if it's California. I don't know if I totally agree with you, Shea, on California. Just because Silicon Valley's there, there's a lot of, entrepreneurial investment and all of that comes out of California. And I think we've seen this with some of the reactions to policies they've proposed. But definitely Colorado is leading it. Like, you're going to have to be compliant with Colorado in a year if you want to sell there. And I think, Illinois is a big driver, New York's a big driver, but don't wait. And Utah has got something.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be shocked when you start seeing all of these other states have something, even if it's not AI specific and it's industry specific, right? So you think Colorado's insurance law, the facial recognition law in Illinois, it could be one for education, how AI is used in a schoolroom in some random state. So, yeah. Brian, you look like you have a question.
Many questions are running through my mind. It is just it's fascinating conversation, and I think everyone's going to have to just kind of be in a kind of a hurry up and wait. We got to hurry up to figure out what's happening, make our best guess, and then kind of wait on what's happening. And again, that's kind of where I see a lot of the stagnation that can come of this. But I was thinking about it as you were talking. The enterprise typically leads the charge, right? So they're gonna, and I would say most enterprises are out here trying to do the right thing. They have the most to lose, right? So if they're doing things in a sketchy, risky, biased way, we talk about litigation being the control mechanism, then they're going to get sued on laws that are already in place that aren't specific to AI, right? So AI becomes an actor, an agent of an organization, and we've seen lawsuits like this where, oh, well, it acted on behalf of the organization, so the organization's at risk because you violated some other marketing law, for instance, right? So I don't see everything getting ripped out. And it's just interesting how everything will play out. But certainly, I think industry is going to be much more at the forefront and protecting their position and avoiding these large lawsuits that can come with the use of AI. And then, maybe that does help drive more of a global space because, hey, it's a global market. There's a lot of things that we're talking about with respect to, foreign policy, foreign trade, like those things are even, interesting. Like, I don't even know how, you know, any of these tariffs could even come into play. I haven't spent enough time thinking about that. As software, could that be, tariffed? Like all sorts of crazy thoughts around that probably. But I think you'll just see more the enterprise influencing. They're going to likely adopt EU because they are playing, across the pond. And if they push that emphasis down into the mid enterprise, I think you'll see a lot of adoption there because it's just going to be cost of doing business with these large, Fortune 100s, Fortune 500s. So I guess that would be my hopeful thought is if people can adopt some of the larger international frameworks, they're going to be put in the position where they're best suited to do business, right? So, look at it from the other side. Instead of what's the least I need to do to be compliant, right? That's going to put you in a losing position somewhere in your sales cycle of your product, right? Because every business is trying to grow, and that's normal capitalism. We want to expand our markets. So think of it from the other side. What enables me to sell and create the most opportunity for my organization? It's really probably benchmarking to some of these more, um, you know, global policies like the EU AI Act. And I think that it's a good strategy for a lot of risk teams. And if you're really searching for what to do, I would suggest, do the best in class. And again, everyone's going to take a stance on that. I know from our point of view, obviously, we're here to promote human flourishing. So bias and risk is very important to our mission. And I don't think that that's a political thing. It's just a people thing, right? So I hope that's what we see. And I think there are a lot of really good people who are concerned about the things we talk about here and what regulation, I think the intent of regulation was supposed to do. And, I'm pro capitalism. So hopefully, yeah, it does get solved in the private space. And we do see those good people and new businesses and things emerge to help, push people towards a better outcome. I think that's what everybody really wants in this. So I'm excited. You know, there's a lot of good business people out there that want to do good things. I hope that's what we see.
Yep, absolutely. I feel like that's a good place to end it, because we want a positive message. And I think I don't see the results of this election, or the way the geopolitical landscape is changing, affecting our mission at all. It makes it, if anything, it makes it more important, because the more uncertainty there is, the more we need to be vigilant to make sure that technology is serving people. And that's really what we're trying to do. And I think, we won't talk about it this podcast, but probably next one, we're going to talk about some of the educational and workforce initiatives that BABL's trying to put out. And I think there's a lot of people probably feeling uncertain about their jobs, and what would be like a good thing for them to start getting into to secure their jobs. And I think focusing on understanding how AI is going to influence the workforce and influence the way you do work, and putting yourself in a position to maximally take advantage of that, is going to be, with safety and compliance being a really critical part of that, hopefully is going to also promote human flourishing. So I'm going to leave it there. If you are watching this on YouTube, if you liking and subscribing helps us out a lot. If you're listening to us on podcast, thank you so much for listening. This has been another Lunchtime Babbling, and we'll see you soon.